I'm Ivan Blake, 42 years old, and for the past decade and a half I've carved out a career in corporate finance at a major Fortune 500 company. I'm not just any director. I'm the guy who takes pride in precision, the meticulous one who thrives on thorough documentation and flawless execution. My colleagues joke that I have a sixth sense for numbers and contracts, while my managers rely on me to manage budgets north of $200 million without missing a single detail. Every financial model I build, every compliance audit I oversee, every contract I review, it's all an exercise in absolute accuracy. Numbers don't lie, and neither do the documents I keep. That's my world. It's funny though, you can be the most organized, the most careful person in your professional life, and still be blindsided in your personal one. My wife, Sarah, came to me one afternoon with a folder in her hand, her smile tight, her eyes cold. I remember the exact moment, because it shattered everything I thought was solid in my life. She filed for divorce, and not just that. She took from me the house we built together, a sprawling California estate valued at $4.2 million. It wasn't just the house. She took full custody of our two children, Liam and Grace. In the courtroom, watching her smile as she told me, "You'll never see the kids again," felt like a knife twisting inside my chest. But I didn't let my voice crack. I replied calmly, "Understood," masking the storm raging beneath. That calm was not surrender, it was calculation. I had spent years shaping my professional persona around control and strategy. I knew the power of patience, of measured responses. While my heart screamed, my mind was already mapping the path ahead. The stakes were astronomical, not just financially, but emotionally. Losing custody of Liam and Grace was unbearable. Losing the home, the foundation of our family's memories, was devastating. But I was not defeated. Not yet. Sarah was determined, aggressive, and had hired an attorney who played hardball. But I had something she didn't expect. Years of ingrained discipline in record-keeping, a habit I'd never thought would become my lifeline. My expertise wasn't just about crunching numbers. It was about preserving every contract, every email, every ledger. I had a habit of backing up everything. Digital archives, physical files. I kept detailed calendars, recorded meetings, saved every correspondence. Professionally, that was second nature. Personally, it was my armor. As I stood in that courtroom, hearing Sarah's cruel laughter echo through the chambers, I reminded myself, anger won't win this fight. Strategy will. The same careful, methodical approach that guided my corporate decisions would now chart my way through this personal nightmare. I left the courthouse that day shattered but not broken. The house, the kids, the life I thought I had, it all seemed to slip away in a blur. But beneath the pain, a seed of resolve took root. If there was one thing I knew beyond doubt, it was that no document goes unnoticed forever. Every financial agreement, every custody arrangement, every legal nuance, there's always a way back if you know where to look. And so as the city lights of California faded behind me, I began to prepare for a battle that would test every ounce of my professional expertise and personal fortitude. The journey ahead would be long and exhausting, but I was ready to fight, not with brute force or emotion, but with precision, with patience, and with every piece of evidence I could find. Because this wasn't just about money or property. This was about my family, my children, and reclaiming the life that was unjustly taken from me. And I was determined to prove that sometimes the most devastating losses can be the beginning of the most powerful comebacks. Over the span of 15 years, my career in corporate finance was much more than a job. It was a carefully constructed craft, refined through countless hours of spreadsheets, board meetings, and strategic planning sessions. I wasn't just crunching numbers. I was designing financial blueprints that shaped the company's future. One of my proudest achievements was engineering financial models that ultimately generated $18 million in annual savings. To most, that number might seem abstract, but for me it represented every late night spent poring over data, every negotiation with vendors, and every cross-department collaboration that had to align perfectly for those savings to materialize. My role demanded an unyielding attention to detail. Managing budgets that soared beyond $200 million was a responsibility I carried with both pride and precision. Each dollar needed justification. Every expense required scrutiny. I built complex forecasting models that predicted market fluctuations and internal cash flow with uncanny accuracy, enabling our company to adjust strategies proactively rather than reactively. The financial compliance audits I led were no less critical. Regulatory reviews were notoriously unforgiving, and I knew that failure was not an option. Every audit passed flawlessly under my watch, a testament to the airtight documentation and rigorous internal controls I maintained. This wasn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about the trust of shareholders, the livelihoods of thousands of employees, and the integrity of the institution itself. I became known within the company for my meticulous record-keeping. Contracts, emails, budgets, everything was archived systematically. I wasn't content to merely file away documents. I created a system where every piece of correspondence or agreement could be retrieved at a moment's notice, supported by clear annotations and cross-references. This habit was so ingrained that it extended beyond work. My personal files and calendars were equally organized. Over the years, I developed strong relationships with clients and colleagues alike. These were not superficial connections, but partnerships built on transparency and reliability. My dedication earned me 2 promotions, elevating me to the director level, where I was entrusted with shaping major financial strategies and mentoring younger analysts. My compensation reflected this responsibility, with a high salary and vested stock options that tied my success directly to the company's performance. Alongside this financial security, I shared joint ownership of our California home, a sprawling estate valued at $4.2 million. It was a symbol of everything Sarah and I had built together. Yet, with all these professional accomplishments, I never imagined that my habit of detailed documentation would one day become the cornerstone of my personal defense. It was a discipline born out of professional necessity, but it evolved into a shield against the chaos my marriage was about to unleash. When Sarah filed for divorce, I instinctively turned to the one asset I had fully under my control: documented evidence. The contracts, the financial statements, the recorded communications, they were all there, patiently waiting to reveal the truth beneath the veneer of betrayal. I hadn't anticipated that my meticulousness would become my lifeline in a battle where emotions threatened to overshadow logic. In hindsight, that habit was more than a professional strength. It was a critical advantage I would soon need to protect my family and reclaim what was unjustly taken. The same precision I applied to multi-million-dollar budgets was now my weapon in unraveling the complex legal and financial web Sarah and her attorney had woven. As the dust settled from the initial shock of divorce proceedings, I found myself reaching for those detailed records, understanding that behind every number and note lay the possibility to counterattack. The very system I had built to manage corporate risk suddenly became a roadmap to confront personal loss. What began as a career built on financial expertise was about to become a personal crusade, one where accuracy, patience, and relentless attention to detail would define my path forward. Sarah Blake was a force to be reckoned with, and I quickly realized that her motivations went far beyond the typical heartbreak and bitterness you might expect in a divorce. Greed and control were driving her, and she wasn't about to back down without a fight. From the moment she filed, it was clear this was a calculated play to seize everything she could. The $4.2 million house wasn't just a home. To her, it was a prize, a symbol of power she intended to claim. And the custody of Liam and Grace. The stakes there were even higher, more personal, more devastating. She brought in Marcus Reynolds, a top-tier divorce attorney known for his aggressive tactics and no-holds-barred approach. Marcus had a reputation in California's legal circles as a bulldog, relentless in court, unyielding in negotiations, and ruthlessly strategic. Sarah knew exactly what she was doing when she hired him. Together they formed a perfect storm, a legal powerhouse designed to maximize her gains and lock me out of everything. It wasn't just about winning. It was about annihilating my chance to keep any semblance of the life we had built. Marcus's strategy was clear from the outset. Paint me as an absent father, a man too caught up in his career to provide the stable home our children needed. My frequent travel, late nights, and intense focus on work became ammunition they wielded mercilessly. Sarah and Marcus portrayed me as unreliable, emotionally distant and financially unstable despite the truth. I was astounded by how quickly they twisted facts and manipulated the narrative. The court hearings felt less like a search for justice and more like a ruthless game of chess where they held all the pieces. But what neither Sarah nor Marcus realized was that beneath the surface, there were protections in place, legal shields crafted years before this storm. My late mother, Linda, had been a paralegal with a keen understanding of legal vulnerabilities. Years ago, she anticipated that life could throw curveballs, that family might fracture, and that my children and I might need safeguarding. She had prepared trust documents and granted power of attorney rights that explicitly protected our financial interests and parental rights in case of crisis. These documents were not only detailed, but deliberately confidential and securely hidden. Sarah and Marcus's critical oversight was their ignorance of these hidden archives. They had aggressively pursued their agenda, banking on the assumption that the legal battlefield was theirs to dominate with brute force. They failed to realize that my mother's foresight was a formidable countermeasure, one that would disrupt their carefully laid plans if discovered. Marcus, in particular, operated under a false sense of security, unaware that beneath the surface of standard divorce proceedings lay a complex network of trust agreements and legal instruments that could unravel his case. This oversight wasn't just a small mistake, it was a monumental blind spot. The trust documents outlined irrevocable trusts that held significant financial assets, powers of attorney that gave me legal authority even in my absence, and custody stipulations that legally constrained Sarah's ability to claim full control without oversight. These weren't mere formalities, they were legal battles waiting to be fought, weapons that could decisively tilt the scales in my favor. As the divorce proceedings advanced, Sarah's relentless pursuit and her attorney's aggressive tactics masked their ignorance of this hidden layer. They pushed hard, confident that their narrative would win the day. But I knew better. Behind the courtroom bravado and the public displays of control lay a deeper, quieter power rooted in meticulously prepared legal documentation and my mother's unwavering desire to protect her family. It was this knowledge that anchored me amidst the chaos. The realization that I was not as vulnerable as they assumed gave me a strange sense of calm. I wasn't just a man losing his home and children. I was a man with tools, with strategy, ready to reclaim what was being taken. The battle ahead would be brutal, but I had an edge they had completely underestimated. From that point on, every move Sarah and Marcus made became a step in a dance I was quietly leading toward discovery. Their oversight, their failure to uncover or even suspect those trust documents, was the fissure in their armor, and I intended to exploit it with the same precision and discipline that had defined my entire professional life. Because while Sarah's motivations were greed and control, my motivation was clear: justice for my children, protection of our home, and the preservation of everything my mother had fought to secure, even if it meant facing the hardest battle of my life. After the final hearing in California, when the judge's gavel fell and I left the courtroom empty-handed, I knew I needed a fresh start, a place where I could think clearly, away from the chaos Sarah had created. That's when I packed my bags and headed to Ohio, to the small town where my mother, Linda, had lived before she passed away. Moving into her basement wasn't what I had imagined for myself, but it was quiet, familiar, and offered a sanctuary to regroup. The basement was a time capsule of her life. Stacks of old books, faded photographs, legal pads filled with her meticulous handwriting. My mother had always been a quiet protector, someone who worked behind the scenes to hold our family together when things got tough. I felt her presence in every corner of that dimly lit room, and it was here, amidst the dust and memories, that I began to search for answers. One chilly autumn evening, as the sun dipped behind the Ohio maples, I found myself drawn to the furnace that hummed steadily against the far wall. There was something oddly out of place, a faint outline of a rectangular seam in the drywall behind the heater. My curiosity piqued. I cautiously pried at the edges with a screwdriver I found nearby. After several minutes, a hidden panel gave way, revealing a heavy steel safe embedded into the wall. My heart quickened. How had I never noticed this before? The safe's surface was cold and worn, the kind of patina that comes from decades of untouched silence. There was no label, no hint of its contents. I examined the dial. It was a traditional combination lock, the kind you'd find in old bank vaults or secret storerooms. Then, almost instinctively, I reached for my wallet and pulled out my driver's license. My birthday stared back at me, 03-1478. It felt oddly personal. With a deep breath, I dialed the combination, 03-1478, hoping that this was not just a coincidence, but a deliberate clue left by my mother. The lock clicked open, and the door swung out to reveal a small but impeccably organized collection, thick envelopes sealed with wax stamps, folders marked with dates, and a single folded letter resting on top. I unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, precise, deliberate, and filled with warmth despite the gravity of the words. It began, "If you're reading this, Ivan, it means you are facing trials I feared might come. I have taken steps to protect you and your children from the storms life may bring." Her voice echoed in ink, a silent embrace from beyond the grave. Beneath the letter lay a series of documents, legal trusts, powers of attorney, and custody agreements, all prepared 5 years earlier. Each was stamped, notarized, and detailed in a way that spoke volumes about her foresight. The trusts were irrevocable, designed to shield assets from disputes and unauthorized claims. Powers of attorney granted me specific legal authority, even if I were incapacitated or absent. Most striking were the custody stipulations embedded within the trusts, explicitly safeguarding Liam and Grace's welfare and my parental rights. I sat down, the weight of the discovery settling over me like a heavy blanket. Here was something Sarah and Marcus had never anticipated, a fortress of legal protections my mother had quietly built, anticipating exactly the kind of crisis I now faced. I methodically began reviewing each page, analyzing the language, the conditions, the triggers. Every clause, every footnote, every signature was a potential lever. The basement's dim light flickered as I cross-referenced the trust assets with my existing financial records. Several accounts listed under my mother's estate matched funds that Sarah had failed to disclose in her divorce filings. These weren't just dry legal documents. They were a blueprint for my comeback, a map pointing to where the truth had been concealed. For hours, I worked. My professional instincts kicked in, turning the dusty envelopes into a strategic arsenal. I made lists, highlighted passages, and jotted notes, slowly piecing together how these documents could counter the narrative Sarah had constructed. The irrevocable trusts meant the house and associated assets weren't as vulnerable as the court had believed. The custody stipulations meant her claim to full custody was legally questionable, especially without acknowledging the trust's guardianship provisions. This wasn't luck. It was a legacy. My mother's quiet preparation had left me a lifeline hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment I would need it the most. As dawn crept through the small basement window, I leaned back, exhausted but resolute. The journey ahead was daunting, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I had a weapon forged by love, precision, and foresight, and I knew that the discovery of this safe and what lay inside would change everything. After uncovering the hidden safe and poring over the documents my mother left behind, I realized that my next move had to be calculated and professional. No impulsive reactions, no emotional outbursts. This was a legal chess game, and I needed the right allies on my side. I knew I wasn't equipped to navigate the complex family law landscape alone, especially across state lines. California's legal system was notoriously intricate when it came to divorce and custody disputes, and I needed a specialist, a lawyer experienced not just in family law, but someone who understood trusts, estate planning, and the subtle interplay between financial and custodial rights. I began my search carefully, vetting attorneys with expertise in high-asset divorce cases and trust litigation. I reached out to a few respected firms, discussed my situation discreetly, and finally engaged Jessica Harper, a California-based family law attorney renowned for her strategic acumen and unwavering integrity. Jessica had a reputation for meticulous preparation and a deep understanding of complex trust arrangements in divorce proceedings. Her initial consultation was a breath of fresh air. She listened intently, asked probing questions, and immediately recognized the potential hidden in my mother's legal archives. The first task was to present the trust documents, powers of attorney, and the notarized letter my mother had left. Jessica examined each page with a critical eye, highlighting language that could expose the legal protections Sarah and her attorney had overlooked. Together, we organized the documents into categories: irrevocable trusts, custodial stipulations, and financial accounts, each piece a critical puzzle fragment in rebuilding my case. We cross-referenced the trust assets against the financial disclosures Sarah had made during divorce proceedings and quickly identified glaring omissions and discrepancies. We didn't stop there. I provided Jessica with my extensive archives, emails, text messages, calendars, and detailed financial records from the past several years. Each item was catalogued meticulously, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. We also gathered all court filings and communications associated with the divorce and custody battles. This process demanded patience and precision. Every document had to be airtight, every fact verifiable. Jessica stressed the importance of building a comprehensive, multi-layered strategy, something that would not only challenge Sarah's current claims, but also expose her concealment of assets and undermine her custody assertions. We planned to petition the court to reopen custody hearings and property settlements, armed with the newly discovered trusts and financial evidence. The notarized letters from my mother, detailing her intent and the legal protections she put in place, were particularly persuasive and would serve as cornerstone exhibits. To bolster our position, we began collecting statements from mutual friends and acquaintances who had observed Sarah's financial behaviors and unexplained asset movements. These witnesses could testify to her undisclosed financial actions, lending credibility to the forensic financial investigations Jessica intended to commission. Recognizing the importance of security and redundancy, we created both digital and physical backups of every document. Sensitive files were encrypted and stored in multiple secure locations. I also began maintaining a detailed log of all communications with Sarah's legal team, court officials, and potential witnesses, ensuring nothing would be lost or misrepresented. Over several weeks, the collaboration deepened. Jessica and I met regularly via video calls and exchanged numerous emails to refine our approach. She helped me understand the legal nuances of the trust documents, explaining terms like irrevocable, beneficiary rights, and guardianship provisions in a way that connected back to my personal stakes, my children's welfare, my rightful ownership, and the safeguarding of my mother's legacy. Throughout this process, I remained deliberately calm and professional. I knew my demeanor mattered. Any sign of desperation could undermine our credibility. When Sarah's attorney reached out for settlement talks, I deferred all communications to Jessica, who responded firmly but respectfully, refusing to entertain partial offers that didn't acknowledge the full scope of the evidence we had amassed. The strategy we crafted was clear: methodically dismantle Sarah's claims by exposing her failure to disclose trust assets and by asserting the legal authority granted by my mother's powers of attorney and custodial trusts. This was not about revenge. It was about justice and protecting my family's future. Every document, every witness, every piece of evidence was a brick in the foundation of what I hoped would be a successful reversal. In a world where control had slipped through my fingers, this meticulous orchestration of legal strategy became my anchor. I was no longer merely a man beaten by circumstance. I was a strategist, reclaiming his ground, armed with truth and fortified by my mother's foresight. And the battle that had once seemed lost was beginning to tilt. My attorney, Jessica Harper, dove into the mountain of evidence with the kind of laser focus I'd only seen in the boardrooms where I'd spent years dissecting complex financial data. As we sifted through the trust documents, notarized letters, and the meticulously archived records I'd provided, patterns began to emerge, patterns that exposed not only Sarah's lies, but also procedural violations that cut deep into her legal claims. First and foremost, Jessica identified that Sarah's failure to disclose the trust assets was a direct violation of court orders. The trust wasn't some obscure sidebar. It was a legal entity holding significant assets that Sarah had completely omitted from her financial disclosures during the divorce proceedings. This omission wasn't accidental. It was a calculated attempt to hide resources that rightfully belonged to the estate, and by extension, to the children and me. The discovery fundamentally altered the landscape of the entire case. Suddenly, what had seemed like a straightforward property dispute was now a case of deliberate concealment of assets, something that courts take very seriously. But the revelations didn't stop there. The custody claims Sarah had been so aggressively pushing were, in many ways, undermined by the very trust documents she'd failed to mention. My late mother had crafted legal provisions that established guardianship powers and custodial safeguards embedded within these trusts. These weren't vague suggestions, but legally binding stipulations that directly challenged Sarah's unilateral claim to full custody. For example, the trust contained clauses that required collaborative decision-making regarding the children's upbringing, education, and health, decisions that couldn't be overridden by one parent without consent or legal review. These clauses reflected my mother's deep understanding of family dynamics and her intent to protect both my and my children's interests, even in the event of my incapacitation or prolonged absence. Sarah's courtroom narrative, painting me as an unfit, distant father, collided headlong with these legal protections, which granted me significant parental authority, irrespective of the divorce filings. Jessica also found that Sarah's attorney, Marcus Reynolds, had overlooked these trust provisions entirely, failing to conduct the kind of thorough discovery that might have revealed their existence. This oversight was a critical strategic error on their part, one that shifted the balance of power. While Marcus had wielded aggression and courtroom theatrics to seize control, he had left a blind spot large enough for us to exploit. Beyond custody, the financial audits conducted by Jessica's team uncovered a web of hidden accounts and transfers funded by assets within the trust. These accounts had never been declared, and their existence directly contradicted Sarah's sworn financial statements. The audit revealed at least $250,000 transferred covertly over several years, funds that should have been part of the shared marital estate. This discovery added fuel to our legal arguments for property settlement adjustments and possible sanctions for asset concealment. The trust documents themselves were robust, irrevocable trusts established to shield assets from manipulation or unauthorized claims. The powers of attorney granted me legal authority over these trusts, including control of the financial accounts and decision-making powers that extended beyond ordinary divorce settlements. Their notarized nature and precise language gave them weight that courts rarely dismiss without thorough examination. With these revelations, Jessica and I prepared a series of motions aimed at reopening both the custody hearings and the property settlements. We knew the court would need to reassess our case in light of this newly uncovered evidence. The motions were meticulously drafted, supported by the notarized letters from my mother, affidavits from estate lawyers attesting to the validity of the trusts, and expert opinions from family counselors addressing the implications of custody provisions embedded within the trust structures. We also anticipated challenges. Sarah's team might contest the admissibility of these documents or question their relevance to the current proceedings. To preempt this, we gathered corroborating evidence, statements from mutual friends and acquaintances who had witnessed Sarah's undisclosed financial maneuvers and could attest to her controlling behavior regarding the children. These testimonies added an indispensable human element that complemented the cold, hard facts. Throughout this phase, I maintained a disciplined approach, balancing my professional life with the escalating legal battle. Every document was cross-verified, every statement painstakingly reviewed. I ensured that communication with Jessica was continuous and that we were always prepared for the next move. The weight of the evidence we had amassed was starting to visibly unsettle Sarah's legal team, who remained unaware of the full extent of our findings. This phase was not just about presenting facts, it was about constructing an unassailable legal fortress, one that Sarah and Marcus could no longer breach. The violations uncovered were serious enough to shift the momentum decisively. I felt a quiet confidence building, a sense that the meticulous, methodical work we'd done was beginning to pay dividends. As those motions were finalized and prepared for submission, I realized that this wasn't merely a legal battle. It was a reckoning built on the foundations of foresight, precision, and the unyielding determination to fight for what was rightfully mine. The documents my mother had left behind, combined with the evidence I'd gathered, had transformed what felt like defeat into an opportunity, a chance to rewrite the story and reclaim the future for my children and me. Before we filed our motions, Jessica and I knew the groundwork had to be flawless. We carefully crafted and then served formal notices to Sarah and her legal team, clear, precise documents citing the enforcement of the irrevocable trusts and pointing out the serious concealment of assets. These notices weren't just legal formalities. They were strategic signals that the tide was turning, that the court would soon confront facts Sarah had tried to bury. I personally took the step of informing the court about my mother's legal provisions, submitting detailed affidavits that outlined the scope and intent of the trusts and powers of attorney. It was crucial to emphasize that these were not reactive or opportunistic claims, but long-established legal protections my mother had painstakingly put in place years before this upheaval. I wanted the court to understand the depth of foresight behind these documents and their binding nature. This was more than just paperwork. It was my mother's legacy to safeguard her grandchildren and me. With the court now aware of these provisions, the atmosphere shifted. Opposing counsel, Sarah's team, received these notices and were clearly caught off guard. They had operated under the assumption that they controlled the narrative, that their aggressive tactics would carry the day. Instead, they were forced into a defensive posture, scrambling to respond to allegations of asset concealment and breaches of trust enforcement. Yet, they still hadn't grasped the full extent of the evidence we held. Alongside these legal maneuvers, I pushed for a temporary custody arrangement to protect Liam and Grace. We filed emergency petitions seeking the court's immediate intervention to ensure their welfare wasn't compromised amid the ongoing dispute. The judge granted a temporary order, placing the children's care under joint supervision, a vital step that prevented Sarah from exercising unchecked control. It was a small but significant victory, proof that the law could act swiftly when presented with compelling evidence about children's best interests. Throughout this process, I maintained a steady, professional demeanor. I understood that any emotional outburst or rash action could undermine our position. So every communication with the court and Sarah's counsel was handled through Jessica, ensuring a consistent strategic front. I met all required disclosures promptly, submitted documentation with surgical precision, and never let frustrations seep into our legal correspondence. This discipline wasn't just about appearances, it was about building credibility and trust with the court, showing that I was a responsible parent and a methodical professional. Meanwhile, Sarah and her attorney proceeded as if unaware of the full scope of our legal arsenal. Their confidence in their flawed strategy played into our hands. They continued filing motions and pushing narratives that ignored the legal weight of the trusts and powers of attorney. Their failure to perform thorough discovery or investigate my mother's estate was a critical error, one that would soon expose them to significant legal repercussions. At home, the stress was palpable, but I channeled it into preparation. I reviewed every document repeatedly, rehearsed my statements, and coordinated closely with Jessica. We mapped out potential scenarios, anticipating counter-arguments and planning meticulous responses. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a strategic campaign demanding patience and precision. With formal notices served, the court informed, and temporary custody secured, the stage was set. The next phase of our fight would be to leverage these legal instruments to dismantle Sarah's claims and begin the process of restoring what had been unjustly taken. But for now, I had to keep my composure and trust the plan we had built, knowing the battle was only just beginning. The moment the court ordered an investigation into the undisclosed trust assets, the tides of this bitter battle began shifting in my favor. It was a critical breakthrough, one that came after weeks of careful preparation, strategic filings, and tireless collaboration with my attorney, Jessica. The judge's decision wasn't just a procedural step, it was a public acknowledgement that Sarah's financial disclosures had been incomplete, and it sent a clear message that concealment would not be tolerated. Immediately, the court issued a freeze on the $4.2 million California house, the very estate Sarah had quickly claimed as her own. All related accounts tied to the property were locked down, preventing any further attempts to liquidate or transfer assets. The weight of that freeze felt immense, but it was a necessary blockade to protect what was rightfully ours. I knew that this legal pause was vital to prevent Sarah from making any irreversible moves while the investigation unfolded. Almost as soon as the freeze was enacted, Sarah's attorney reached out through official channels. Their tone was notably different, less aggressive, tinged with caution. Marcus Reynolds, ever the hawk in court, now sought a meeting to discuss potential settlement options. I heard through Jessica that they were interested in partial agreements, presumably hoping to salvage some gains before the full extent of the trust documents could be fully leveraged against them. But I was unmoved. The stakes were too high to entertain anything less than full transparency and fair restitution. I trusted the strategy we had painstakingly developed, and I knew that accepting piecemeal deals would only weaken our position. So, through Jessica's firm but professional responses, I declined all offers that didn't reflect the full scope of evidence and our rightful claims. Around this time, the court reopened custody mediation. The atmosphere was charged, a delicate mix of legal maneuvering and emotional undercurrents. The mediation shed new light on Sarah's omissions. The trust documents and financial proofs we presented exposed gaps in her narrative. It became clear that her claims of sole custody were not only legally questionable, but also undermined by her hidden financial dealings. Balancing this intense legal battle with my ongoing professional responsibilities was demanding, yet I remained committed to both fronts. My colleagues and clients, who had been aware of the situation in bits and pieces, began offering quiet support. Their messages, whether a simple check-in or discreet words of encouragement, reminded me that I was not isolated in this fight. Somehow, their confidence in me fueled my resolve even more. Within our circle, the mounting legal pressure began to visibly unsettle Sarah and her team. I noticed subtle shifts, more cautious legal filings, delays in responses, and a palpable tension when court dates approached. It was as though the weight of the evidence, the freezing of assets, and the threat of forensic audits started to crack their once confident front. Yet beneath this surface of legal chess, I kept my composure. I knew these moments would come. I had anticipated resistance, delays, and even attempts to intimidate. But with every document secured, witness statement gathered, and procedural step followed, we were tightening the noose. The tide was turning, but the war was far from over. As the investigation into the trust assets gained momentum, I prepared myself for the next phase, leveraging the findings to reopen the custody and property settlements fully. My mother's legacy, once hidden in that basement safe, was now an active force, challenging the unfair narrative Sarah had constructed. The house was frozen, the truth was emerging, and the path forward was becoming clearer. Still, I knew better than to underestimate their resilience. Sarah's legal team was formidable, and despite their cracks, they were unlikely to admit defeat easily. The coming weeks would test my patience, professionalism, and strategic thinking more than ever. But in that moment, as the court's orders came down and the legal machinery shifted gears, I felt a flicker of hope, a sign that the careful groundwork we laid was finally bearing fruit. The battle lines were drawn more sharply now. The game was escalating, and I was ready to face whatever moves my adversaries made next. Because this wasn't just about frozen assets or reopened hearings. It was about reclaiming the future for my children, securing the home where so many memories lived, and proving that meticulous preparation and quiet resilience could prevail against even the most ruthless of betrayals. The moment our motions reached the judge, I felt a cautious surge of hope. Weeks of painstaking preparation, collaborative strategizing with Jessica, and sleepless nights spent cross-referencing every document culminated in this critical juncture. The judge's ruling wasn't merely a procedural win, it was a seismic shift in the battle. He reinstated joint custody of Liam and Grace, pending a full review of the trust documents we'd uncovered. This was no small victory. It was an affirmation that the court recognized the gravity of my mother's foresight and the legal protections she'd painstakingly put in place. Even more compelling was the order requiring Sarah to fully disclose and account for all assets tied to the trusts and estates. Under penalty of perjury, she was now legally bound to reveal everything she had concealed. The courtroom's atmosphere changed palpably. This order meant the veil of secrecy Sarah had maintained was being lifted, exposing her prior omissions to rigorous legal scrutiny. The house, the accounts, the transfers, all would be examined under a microscope. It was the first time since this ordeal began that the truth truly had a chance to surface. But the real turning point came with the forensic financial audit ordered as part of the court's review. Jessica arranged for a team of forensic accountants specializing in uncovering hidden assets in complex family law cases. When their initial report landed on our desk, I was stunned but not surprised to find evidence of approximately $250,000 in covert transfers, money moved quietly over several years, into accounts that had never been declared during the divorce proceedings. These funds were not just numbers on a page, they were proof of deliberate concealment, a breach of both legal and ethical obligations. Every dollar hidden was a further strike against Sarah's credibility. As the audit findings circulated among the court and legal teams, Sarah's attorney's demeanor shifted noticeably. Marcus Reynolds, once so unshakable and aggressive, began extending olive branches in the form of settlement proposals. I learned of these through Jessica, who handled every communication with calm precision. They proposed talks, hoping to negotiate a deal before the full extent of the trust documents and financial irregularities became public knowledge or fully adjudicated. It was a tactical retreat on their part, a move designed to stem losses. But I stood firm. Accepting anything less than full accountability and restoration of rightful custody and property stakes was not an option. The stakes went far beyond money. They were about integrity, about justice for my children, and the legacy my mother had left behind. Through Jessica, I professionally declined all partial offers, signaling that our case was far stronger than they anticipated and that we were prepared to see it through to the end. Simultaneously, the court reopened custody mediation, forcing both parties back to the negotiating table. The atmosphere was tense. Legal representatives armed with documents, evidence, and newfound leverage clashed over the fate of Liam and Grace. The trust provisions embedded within my mother's estate plans played a pivotal role here, challenging Sarah's claims of sole custody. Those stipulations were not mere formalities. They were binding agreements requiring collaborative parental decisions and oversight, underscoring my continued role as a primary caretaker. This legal framework weakened Sarah's narrative, infusing the mediation with a new layer of complexity. Throughout these developments, I balanced the mounting pressure of litigation with my demanding corporate responsibilities. It was exhausting, but I kept pushing forward. Surprisingly, colleagues and clients who had caught wind of my personal struggles reached out with quiet encouragement and support, small gestures that bolstered my resolve. Their faith in me reminded me that while this was a personal fight, it was also a testament to professional discipline and integrity. Meanwhile, Sarah and her legal team appeared increasingly unsettled. I noticed subtle changes, delays in their filings, less aggressive motions, and a cautious tone in court appearances. It was as if the weight of the evidence and the freezing of assets had chipped away at their confidence. They were navigating a legal landscape far more treacherous than they had anticipated, forced to respond to allegations of concealment and breaches of trust enforcement they had never imagined facing. Yet, despite these shifts, I maintained composure. I knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Battles like these could drag on, with twists and turns designed to exhaust and intimidate. But with every document secured, every witness statement collected, and every legal strategy refined, I felt the noose tightening around the inconsistencies and omissions that had fueled Sarah's claims. The court's orders, the audit findings, and the reopened custody mediation marked a new chapter, a phase where truth was no longer obscured by legal posturing or aggressive tactics. The groundwork laid by my mother's foresight and my own relentless pursuit of evidence had begun to dismantle the fortress of deception. The path forward was challenging, but the momentum had clearly shifted. As I prepared for the next hearings, I reminded myself that this was more than a fight for assets or custody. It was a fight to reclaim the dignity and security of my family. The legal system had started to see beyond Sarah's constructed narrative, and I was ready to continue leveraging every piece of evidence to ensure justice prevailed. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, this moment, marked by the judge's ruling and the audit's revelations, was a beacon. It was proof that careful preparation, strategic patience, and unwavering professionalism could turn the tide against even the most entrenched opposition. The game was far from over, but the pieces were falling into place. Sarah faced sanctions for contempt of court and asset concealment, a devastating blow that shook the foundation of her legal claims and jeopardized her financial standing. The court didn't take these violations lightly. After weeks of meticulous investigation triggered by our motions, the judge issued a formal reprimand against her, highlighting her deliberate withholding of critical information concerning the trust assets and undisclosed transfers. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a public declaration that her conduct breached the integrity expected in family law proceedings. The impact rippled far beyond the courtroom. Her custody claims, which had seemed ironclad through aggressive legal posturing, suddenly appeared fragile and vulnerable under the weight of these revelations. The trust documents we uncovered not only held significant financial power, but also embedded custodial provisions that legally constrained Sarah's unilateral authority over Liam and Grace. These provisions explicitly granted me the right to joint custody and required collaborative decision-making on major aspects of our children's lives. By neglecting to disclose these legally binding agreements, Sarah had undermined her own case, giving the court substantial reason to reconsider custody arrangements. Simultaneously, the court ordered a reversal of property transfers that Sarah had orchestrated in an attempt to shield assets from the divorce settlement. This included the $4.2 million California house, whose ownership had already been a contentious point. The reversal restored my ownership stake in the property, a significant victory that began to restore the material foundation of our family's life together. The judge's ruling reaffirmed that trust law superseded Sarah's attempts to mask assets through fraudulent transfers, sending a clear message that such maneuvers would not stand. News of these developments quickly spread within legal circles, garnering attention from prominent family law bloggers and commentators. The case began to serve as a precedent for trust enforcement in divorce proceedings, highlighting how irrevocable trusts and powers of attorney could be effectively used to protect family assets and parental rights. I was approached by a few legal experts who expressed admiration for the meticulous documentation and strategic application of trust law that had turned what looked like an insurmountable loss into a fight for justice. Meanwhile, the family court proceedings expanded, evolving from a straightforward divorce and custody case into a comprehensive inquiry into Sarah's pattern of deceit and asset concealment. The judge appointed an independent forensic accountant to conduct a thorough audit of all financial transactions associated with the trusts and estates. This expanded investigation was grueling, requiring extensive cooperation from both sides and producing dozens of pages of new evidence that further implicated Sarah. The mounting legal pressure culminated in financial penalties imposed on Sarah, including a substantial fine of $350,000 intended to cover court costs, attorney fees, and punitive damages for contempt. These sanctions underscored the court's intolerance for dishonesty and its commitment to upholding transparent legal processes. For Sarah, these consequences were not only financially damaging, but also severely damaged her credibility in court, weakening her custody case and diminishing her leverage in negotiations. Throughout this tumultuous period, I remained focused on maintaining professionalism and strategic composure. Despite the emotionally charged nature of the proceedings, I ensured that every statement, every filing, and every courtroom appearance reflected calm confidence and unwavering attention to detail. I continued to work closely with Jessica, responding promptly to court requests and keeping detailed records of all interactions. This consistent professionalism helped reinforce my position as a responsible parent and reliable party, in stark contrast to Sarah's faltering credibility. The court's recognition of my mother's foresight in crafting the trust and custodial provisions was a profound vindication. It reaffirmed that the legacy she left was not merely legal paperwork, but a robust shield designed to protect her grandchildren and me against unforeseen crises. This acknowledgement resonated deeply, providing a sense of justice slowly materializing amid the chaos. Yet even as these legal victories unfolded, I knew the battle was far from over. Sarah's team was scrambling, recalibrating their approach in light of the sanctions and reversed rulings, but their options were narrowing. The evidence was overwhelming, the legal groundwork solid, and the court's scrutiny intense. The tide was unmistakably turning, but the upcoming hearings and negotiations would demand continued vigilance and tactical precision. As the courtroom drama intensified, I often reflected on how this ordeal had tested not only my professional acumen, but my personal resilience. The darkness of betrayal was met with the light of preparation and foresight. The reversal of property transfers and the imposition of sanctions weren't just legal victories. They were affirmation that justice could be reclaimed through unwavering discipline, strategic patience, and the power of truth. In this critical phase, every move mattered. The next chapters of this fight would build upon these judicial decisions, pushing toward restoring full custody and securing the family assets that had been placed in jeopardy. And so, with renewed determination, I prepared myself for the challenges ahead, knowing that the legacy of my mother's meticulous planning and my own steadfast professionalism had turned the course of this battle and were poised to change everything once again. The final rulings came down with a weight I felt deep in my chest, but met with a strange calmness. The court awarded me full ownership of our $4.2 million California home. It was more than just a legal victory. It was a restoration of the foundation upon which our family's memories, hopes, and futures had been built. Standing there, absorbing the judge's words, I felt the years of relentless preparation, of quiet strategy, and unyielding patience crystallize into tangible justice. It wasn't handed to me lightly. It had been earned through every piece of evidence, every legal motion, and every moment of steadfast professionalism. Moreover, the court granted me primary custody of Liam and Grace. This was the heart of the matter, the most precious, the most personal. The judge's decision reflected the comprehensive picture we'd painted, a father deeply committed, supported by legal protections embedded in the irrevocable trusts my mother created years ago. Those trust provisions, once hidden in that basement safe, now stood as powerful guardians of my parental rights. The ruling acknowledged not only my fitness as a parent, but also the folly in Sarah's attempts to sever my role in our children's lives. Sarah was awarded supervised visitation, an arrangement that underscored the court's concern about her prior actions and omissions. It was a balanced decision, one that prioritized the children's safety and well-being without severing their bond with their mother entirely. The supervised visitation clause was a clear message that while Sarah was still their mother, her conduct had warranted careful oversight. It reassured me that Liam and Grace would be protected from any potential instability or harmful influence during their time with her. The court also ordered Sarah to reimburse $120,000 in legal fees. This reimbursement wasn't just a number. It was an acknowledgement of the undue financial burden her concealment and litigation misconduct had imposed on me. The judge recognized the unfairness of the prolonged battle forced upon me by her actions and formally placed a cost on her attempts to manipulate the legal process. Coupled with the restoration of my stock options, previously frozen during the proceedings, the financial judgment began to rebuild the stability Sarah had tried to dismantle. Beyond the courtroom, the impact of this case rippled throughout the legal and financial communities. Regulators praised the thoroughness and clarity of the documentation we had presented, highlighting how the strategic use of irrevocable trusts and powers of attorney could serve as a precedent for safeguarding assets and parental rights in divorce cases. Legal blogs and industry forums dissected the case, emphasizing the importance of meticulous documentation, foresight, and the often overlooked power that well-constructed trusts hold in family law disputes. Peers in the corporate finance world who had followed bits of my story reached out, acknowledging the unique intersection of professional discipline and personal resilience that had carried me through. The case became a cautionary tale, a reminder that in both business and life the details matter, and that preparedness and precision can overturn even the bleakest circumstances. The family court proceedings themselves expanded beyond my immediate case, prompting broader scrutiny into Sarah's pattern of deceit. The judge appointed an independent forensic accountant to conduct an exhaustive audit, uncovering a trail of concealed assets and questionable financial maneuvers. This expanded investigation laid bare the extent of the misconduct, reinforcing the court's rulings and strengthening my position. Ultimately, the court imposed financial penalties totaling $350,000 against Sarah, covering court costs, attorney fees, and punitive damages for contempt. These sanctions not only penalized her financially, but also severely damaged her credibility, effectively dismantling her leverage in ongoing custody negotiations. The legal system's firm stance sent a clear message that dishonesty and evasion would not be tolerated, especially when children's welfare and family assets were at stake. Throughout these proceedings, I maintained my professionalism, navigating every hearing, filing, and conversation with calm precision. I never let frustration or bitterness cloud my demeanor. Instead, I focused on the facts, the evidence, and the ultimate goal of securing a stable future for Liam and Grace. My attorney Jessica and I worked tirelessly to ensure every step was deliberate and every document airtight. The court's recognition of my mother's foresight in crafting the trust documents was more than a procedural victory. It was a profound validation. It underscored that those carefully prepared legal instruments were not mere formalities, but essential shields, protecting my family from harm and injustice. This acknowledgement resonated deeply within me, reinforcing the bond across generations and the enduring strength of foresight combined with diligence. Yet even as these rulings restored order and justice, I remained acutely aware that the journey ahead would demand continued vigilance. Legal battles rarely conclude neatly, and the intricacies of custody and financial arrangements require ongoing attention. But the foundation was solid. The house was mine. Liam and Grace were in my care. The truth was no longer hidden, and the shadows cast by betrayal were lifting. The momentum had shifted decisively. The case that once threatened to unravel my life now stood as a testament to resilience, precision, and strategic tenacity. And in this turning point, I found not only vindication, but also a renewed sense of purpose to move forward, steadfast and ready for whatever came next. Today, I find myself leading a financial consultancy, a role that feels like both a culmination of my years in corporate finance and a fresh start carved out from the trials I endured. The journey from losing everything, the $4.2 million California home, custody of my children, and the stability I once took for granted, to reclaiming my professional and personal life has been as challenging as it was transformative. But here, in this new chapter, the lessons learned resonate deeply, and the victories are more meaningful. The consultancy I now head specializes in advising high-net-worth individuals and corporations on asset protection and risk management, areas I came to intimately understand through painful first-hand experience. Leveraging the expertise I honed managing budgets exceeding $200 million, and the intricate knowledge of trusts, estate planning, and legal documentation that emerged during my divorce battle, I've been able to grow the firm quickly. The role also came with a 30% salary increase and an equity stake, affirmations that my professional reputation not only survived but thrived despite the personal upheaval. This wasn't just a new job, it was a redefinition of my career on my own terms. Custody arrangements have settled into a balanced rhythm that allows me to be both a dedicated father and a committed professional. I share primary custody of Liam and Grace, a right hard won through the legal battles that once seemed insurmountable. Our time together is filled with the everyday joys of parenting, helping with homework, weekend soccer games, bedtime stories, but also with the quiet reassurance that comes from knowing they are safe and loved. The supervised visitation arrangements for Sarah remain in place, a necessary but bittersweet element that underscores the past struggles while protecting the children's well-being. It's a delicate balance, but one that allows me to rebuild trust and presence in their lives. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I am deeply grateful for the foresight my mother Linda had. Her meticulous preparation, those hidden trusts, powers of attorney, and carefully drafted custody stipulations were lifelines that no courtroom drama or legal subterfuge could sever. She had seen beyond her time, predicting the vulnerabilities that life might expose and building quiet protections that would endure. It's humbling to realize that her legacy was as much about love and protection as it was about legal documents. Without her, the trajectory could have been devastatingly different. Similarly, I now appreciate the value of the professional discipline I cultivated over 15 years, my relentless documentation, my patience, and strategic thinking. It was not anger or desperation that guided me, but a calm, systematic approach that turned chaos into opportunity. Each spreadsheet I created, every contract I archived, every letter I saved, became a piece of a larger puzzle, a means to prove truth and protect what was rightfully mine. The convergence of my personal and professional skills was what ultimately secured justice. This experience has reshaped my perspective on resilience and success. I've learned that setbacks, even devastating ones, can be catalysts for growth when met with clarity and resolve. Emotional control mattered, yes, but so did the willingness to seek help, to collaborate with legal experts, and to trust in a process that, while slow, was just and thorough. I stood stronger not by fighting fire with fire, but by building a fortress of facts and strategy. As I watch Liam and Grace grow, I am mindful of the future I want to create for them, one grounded in stability, integrity, and the knowledge that their father fought not just for material things, but for their security and well-being. The scars from this journey remain, but they serve as reminders of how far we've come. I am proud of the man I am today, one who has turned loss into renewal, betrayal into determination. Professionally, I am more confident than ever. The consultancy is thriving, my client base expanding, and my leadership acknowledged not just because of my technical acumen, but because of the story I carry, a story of perseverance, precision, and integrity. It reminds me daily that in finance, as in life, details matter, foresight matters, and above all, unwavering professionalism matters. My mother's legacy lives on, not only in the documents she left behind, but in the strength she instilled in me. The battle for my home and children was never just about assets or custody. It was about honoring that legacy and building a future worthy of it. As I move forward, I carry a renewed sense of purpose and an unshakable belief that with discipline and patience, justice is attainable and family is worth every fight. The path ahead remains open, full of possibilities and responsibilities. But now more than ever, I face it equipped, with knowledge, with courage, and with the certainty that the darkest moments can be the birthplace of the most profound comebacks.